The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local journalism today at chly.ca/donate. Local news doesn't survive without local support.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Events are taking place across the region to mark World Water Day and Water to Earth Month. Sunday was World Water Day, an annual United Nations observance focusing attention on the importance of fresh water. The RDN is partnering with a number of organizations for various workshops over the coming month, including ones on rainwater harvesting and smart irrigation. They're also offering tours of the local watershed and water treatment plant. Meanwhile, at a Monday special local trust meeting, the Islands Trust presented a report on its freshwater footprint of Gabriola Island, a project aiming to provide info on the island's water availability, distribution, and quality, along with island-specific water use, human impacts, Indigenous knowledge, and climate adaptation, as the Islands Trust works on Gabriola's official community plan. For more on those developments, check out our website, chly.ca/midcoastmorning, where you can find some useful links. Today on the program, we'll be focusing on Nanaimo's water supply. I spoke with the city's manager of water resources.
I'm Mike Squire, manager of water resources for the City of Nanaimo. We look after all of the water supply, which includes our dams in the watershed, down to the water treatment and the major transmission mains that come into the city into the above ground reservoirs.
And the City of Nanaimo's water comes from the South Nanaimo River watershed. What can you tell me about what that is?
You got that. Yeah, our watershed, it comprises of two dams, one of which we call Jump Creek Dam. It was built in 1974, completed in 1974. It impounds about 17 million cubic meters of water. So that's enough water to supply the city for 1 year. With that impoundment, we convey water downstream Jump Creek down towards South Fork Reservoir, which was the original reservoir built in 1931. It's a concrete arch reservoir. It doesn't have any live storage. What I mean by that is we can't lower that reservoir. It has enough head on that to convey water from there. It's a pipe system about 13 kilometers down to our fairly, well, I'm going to say new water treatment plant, which was built in 2015. So there you have it. That's the watershed. The main upper watershed for Jump Creek Reservoir is about 52 square kilometers. Now, we receive most of our precipitation in the wintertime and it fills up. So it depletes during the summertime. And about half of that volume is for public consumption, for potable water. And the other half is for what we call as environmental flow needs. So to help the salmon, the rearing salmon during the fall and also the springtime to make sure that the river has enough water in it to convey that the rearing salmon up the Nanaimo River and also the South Nanaimo River as well.
Can you give me a sense of maybe what kind of population we envision our current water supply and watershed being able to support down the road?
Yeah, great question, because a lot of people think, we build it and they will come. It's actually the opposite of that. We actually follow what we call as official community plans. So for Nanaimo, it's called City Plan, and we just recently completed that. With City Plan, we have our complementary document for that, which is our water supply strategic plan. So we look at what the vision is for Nanaimo, and it's about 148,000 people in the next 20 years. So we take that population and extend it and look at what yield that given climate change, droughts, etc., the population increase, what that demand looks like, And sort of we project out the 20, 30 years and see if we have enough yield to convey that water for that future population. And the good news is, after completing the study and looking at sort of a yield assessment, with climate change, we do have enough water and storage available to deliver potable water for that future population.
What is the state of the city's water infrastructure? Things like water mains, things like the dams.
Yeah, I think we're in really good shape right now. We're entering sort of a period where our water quality improvements are complete. That was done with the completion of the water treatment plant, but we're really looking into building a resilient water supply system. And what I mean by that is looking at our major infrastructure and looking at redundancies and resiliencies within our water supply system to ensure that we always have water available for both public consumption and also firefighting purposes. To give you an example of that, our Midtown Water Supply Project, you may have seen that over the last 3, 4 years, building that big water supply main all the way from College Heights down to Labio area. That was a result of a concrete pipe very similar to Calgary's system that's happened there and Montreal, where it's catastrophic. If you get a water main break, it can basically deplete your system of water. What happened there on Bowen Road, we had a major water main break. We knew about this pipe. It was in the plan. And then it drained 3 reservoirs, and we're trying to isolate that main water transmission main. And the hospital calls and says they're out of water. So we don't want to be in a situation where we can't afford the hospital or the community to be out of water. So we're in this period of building a resilient water supply. That is right top down, from looking at our reservoir down to our transmission mains and ensuring that we have redundancies for any emergencies that we see, whether it be climate change or a catastrophic earthquake event.
Do we have those contingencies right now? Is there something specific we need to or are in the course of doing to prepare them?
Yes, we have emergency plans in place to do that. We have our overall water network, coupled with our capital improvement plan, where if we do receive either a water main break in any area, we have the ability to divert water via a different water main or a transmission distribution main to that area.
So what happened in Calgary, how did that maybe change, or did that change or influence any actions on the city's end? What is the kind of the risk of something comparable happening here?
I think what we chose, rather than monitor, we chose to basically react and remove that infrastructure. We know it's a very high risk infrastructure. It prematurely failed. And when we looked at the pipe that actually failed, we saw indications of a potential other breaks happening. So rather than repair it, we replaced it.
Midcoast Morning is part of our nonprofit newsroom project, supported by listeners like you. Keep this program on the air by funding it today with a monthly sustaining donation at chly.ca/donate. We've got tote bags and shirts if you need an incentive.
Water to Earth Month kicked off this week. Qualicum Beach author Susan Blacklin is launching a new book, Water Justice: What You Don't Know Could Kill You, Wednesday, March 25th at 7 p.m. at Nanaimo's Beban Park Social Center. A full schedule of RDN activities to mark the month begins Friday with a WellSmart workshop on Gabriola Island. Today on the program, we're speaking about the City of Nanaimo's water supply. My guest is Nanaimo's Manager of Water Resources, Mike Squire. I asked him about the state of the city's dams.
We haven't that 1931 concrete arch dam, South Fork Dam. We're currently looking at a seismic analysis on that, ensuring that it will meet like a 1 in 5,000 year event. So seismically, that's like a 7.5 on the Richter scale. That it's a marvel of engineering. That concrete arch dam, when it was built in the location, um, it's all in compression, and the integral strength is the water pushing against it on the rock abutment walls. So we're currently completing that study right now, and it's looking like it's very marginal, looking like it's good for potentially another 50, 60 years, what we're looking at. So that's good news on that aspect.
What is the city's ability to regulate the amount of water used by any one particular property, be it residential or commercial or industrial?
We have water restrictions in place to look at that. So we look at trends. We're very fortunate to have probably over 40 years of data to kind of look at what our reservoir levels are doing, what the consumption is doing, how much we need to convey for environmental flow releases down the Nanaimo River. And so, depending on the time of year, if we're seeing the consumption go over certain limits, we'll start pulling back and we'll start raising watering restrictions. So, we currently have 4 stages right now for watering restrictions. Normally, we go into just stage 2, which limits people to outdoor watering use between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. And the same for that in the evening between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., where they can actually use outdoor watering use. Stage 3 is voluntary. And then we go, if we're not seeing any results, we can go direct to stage 4, which is a complete ban on outdoor water use.
Are we anticipating any water use restrictions for the upcoming summer, or do we have a way of forecasting that?
Yeah, that's a great way. That's always the crystal ball effect. I wish I could. It really depends on June. What I can say, you'll hear a lot of things with snowpack. Snowpack is just a bonus for us. We're a rainfall dominant watershed. What I mean by that is we're very low lying in our watershed. So snowpack is just part of it, but for the most part, we receive the bulk of our water for impoundment behind our dams is during the winter time. And we look forward, we're above normal reservoir elevations at this time of the year. Um, if we have a very dry May, June, that could impact it. We try to have a full reservoir by the end of June so that we can convey waters for, again, both fisheries purposes and also public consumption. But if we see those trends to sort of dip below normal levels, then we're going to hit harder with water conservation measures.
There's been a lot of attention given by members of the public on social media or various media reports or even discussion around the city council table over the last 6 months or so about a proposed data center with regards to water usage specifically. This month, it was reported that the city has a covenant around that property, which, if my understanding is correct, basically says that this is the amount of water we expect it to use. The threshold worked out to a little more than 25 million liters a year, and if the property goes over that, then the city would be able to charge the owner about $60,000. Is that more or less a correct understanding of where that's at, and is there anything you would want members of the public who have been following that or are concerned about the data center and water usage to know?
No, you're exactly, that's it. And data centers are front and center of a lot of communities. And I think that where they get a heightened awareness is where they're in communities where it's not sustainable. If you're looking at areas where they have they're generating electricity by gas turbines, where they're receiving their water through depleting aquifers. but they have cheap land, for instance. An example would be Texas. You're seeing that, and then that's where there's heightened awareness here. The amount of the water that's being used for this data center is very, very minimal, what we're talking about for the overall city consumption. So we were consulted on that as well through that development application.
More generally speaking, when there is some kind of new development, be it a data center, or be it some other new industrial development or whatever, what is the role of the city's water department in saying yes or no, or here are the conditions?
Well, from a high level, it is looking at the official community plan and it fits the purpose. So we've already looked at that, providing water for the official community plan, and if it sits in the appropriate zoning, then it's certainly um, it's already accounted for. From the micro level, we'll look at what demands are in that development for the big one is fire suppression, that for sizing of pipes, etc. Very, very small pipes are required for domestic demands, but very large pipes are required for fire suppression. So that's one thing that is a big factor when you're looking at some of these developments and upsizing the pipes. It's normally for fire suppression purposes.
So, on a high level, we've talked about the official community plan. It envisages over its lifespan, Nanaimo getting to maybe 148,000 people. You've suggested that the current water supply we have looks on track to be able to support that many people. Are there any changes we can expect to come to our water supply over that time? Are there any, I don't know, threats from climate change specifically, or changes to the quality of the water itself from some environmental factors? Like, how are you, what are you kind of monitoring as the years go by on the water supply to make sure it's able to hit those targets?
Well, we've already seen the impacts of climate change. We've had the atmospheric rivers, we've had the windstorms, we've had the heat domes. It has impacted our water systems. For instance, the windstorm took out the power for our water treatment plant. So we put in place a plan to actually ensure that that water treatment plant is always powered. So it's powered by a separate source. So if we can't rely on BC Hydro, we have backup generators. We also have another alternate power source that is uninterrupted, separate from BC Hydro to power all of our telemetry, all of sort of the automation that requires for the brains of the plant to keep running. For the windstorms that is in the watershed, we've made changes to how we basically can our log booms so we can trap some of that debris before it reaches the dams. The heat domes, we're looking at, we have water conservation measures. We know how much is required for public consumption as a minimal amount, but during those times, do we really need to convey water to outdoor water use, as for example, sprinkling lawns, etc. So, what we're doing is we're updating our emergency plans overall, looking at all those climate change impacts, and also developing redundant water supply systems. So we just don't have one pipe going feeding into town. We have two, and we have multiple ways to get it to the residents in the event of emergency.
And is it a correct understanding that the amount of water used in Nanaimo has held relatively stable compared to, say, 30 years ago, even though the population has increased?
Yeah, that's one of the nice things we've looked at with trending. We're using the same amount of water today as we did 35 years ago, despite having 50,000 more people here.
How does that happen?
People are more conscious of water use. It's great. I always like to go back to recycling. 20 years ago, people didn't know where to put their cardboard. Now they do. People are very well aware of water consumption. We have our residential per capita consumption is about 183 liters per capita per day now. That's lower than the BC national average. Why is this happening? Because people are aware. You see drought, you see climate change. There's the provincial drought levels. They're different from water conservation levels, but every time the province makes this awareness or it comes through, people correlate that to water consumption. And we need to conserve water. It's talking like today. We're talking about water. Water is precious to us. It's our biggest natural resource, and we need to take care of it. Um, and also, you're looking at other areas, outdoor water use. People used to just put on their sprinklers and go away on holidays and let it run. Now you have technology where you have irrigation systems that are smart. They can turn off automatically if they detect a break. Um, Things like that. You're also looking at low flush toilets, for instance. Everything's getting better, and appliances that are more eco-friendly.
Is there any particular message you want to most pass on to people as regards the city's water supply? Either something you think people need to hear, or perhaps the most common question you get asked?
No, we have a very unique system here. It's a very, from the standpoint of our watershed, it's a very robust watershed. It's able to handle big precipitation events. Like we receive three times the amount of precipitation in the watershed than we do here as the West Coast storms come in. So it is very resilient. It is here for the next 20, 30 years, provided that, we still can conserve water the way that we're going. And then we're trying to build a redundant supply, so it's sort of a sustainable community.
Well, you shared that the water supply here is like largely rain as opposed to the snowpack. We've seen in the last 5 years multiple times where there have been really long, severe droughts in the summer. How has that impacted the ability of the supply to kind of cope and meet the demand in the moment? Are we able to endure those? Is enough like built up over the non-drought months to kind of make it through those?
Yeah, and it's a real balance. So what we're seeing is our summer being stretched out into the shouldering seasons. Typically, our summer would start late May, end of September. Now we're seeing that stretched out into April, late October. So now, with climate change impacts, what we're looking at is we're going to receive more precipitation, but it's going to be highly concentrated into the winter months. So we looked at that as part of our water modeling, like how do we actually can we convey that amount of water even though it's stretched out into that summer months. So yeah, two good things coming out of that is looking at our actual consumption per capita is continuing to get lower and lower. So people are understanding the the water use and also our water conservation efforts. Looking at, we have that ability to, um, conserve a little bit more in the summertime and use less water on our overall outdoor water use for lawns and gardens. So you're seeing a lot more brown lawns in the community as opposed to the early 90s and 80s. A lot of people had the green lawns and it was more wasted water. There's a lot of money that goes into conveying water to your home, that being the impoundment of water from the dams to the treatment plant and getting it there. And then just to put it onto outdoor water use onto your lawns. I think people are starting to get that message. And so we're seeing that. To put it into perspective, when we're looking at our earlier studies in the 90s and late 80s, there was, with the population growth, was very parallel with water use. Now we're seeing that declining. The actual water use is declining and we're continuing to grow in population. So that's good news. But if you look at the earlier studies that were happening in the 90s, it was projecting we need to have another dam or impound more water in the watershed like now. So it would have been like in the next few years, we would have had to build a new dam. With water conservation efforts and the amount of water that we're using, that's been deferred 30, 40 years from now.
So rainwater matters for our water system. It helps fuel our water supply. What we're seeing now is that a lot of that, we're still getting a lot of rain, but it's coming from November to March more than it used to. And then the question is, how much of that can we kind of harvest and save? And the answer is...
Yeah, the answer is the impoundment that we have in our dam. So it fills up quicker than it used to in the past, pardon me. And we have enough impoundment. We have the ability to raise our spill gates a little higher than normal. But we got to be aware of those incoming storms so we don't overwhelm the dam. So it's a bit of a balance in that regard too.
Well, Mike Squire, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me about this.
You're welcome, Joe.
Mike Squire is Manager of Water Resources for the City of Nanaimo. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, you can email us at news@chly.ca. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
This program gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.